and we get to live this one wild and precious life, as Mary Oliver says. And for a lot of us here, we get to live that as youth workers and youth work educators and youth work trainers. And I think there's a huge privilege about that. And that is really about how we collaborate, how we work together in some way between those two things that are often considered to be opposites, the coalface and the ivory tower. And I've noticed sometimes, particularly around youth work, there is a tendency to think that the two things are quite remote from each other, that people who work at the coalface have one sort of experience that is real and down and with the kids, and these people who live in the ivory tower don't really understand what it's like, and the two sides can't communicate. And one of the things that strikes me is, like a lot of people, I was an accidental youth worker. And I suppose what I really want to do is today, as I said, is to start with some ideas and to think about practicalities. And in this space, moving from the coalface to the ivory tower and back, I suppose I want to dispel some of those cliches. I think they're not helpful to us. And I think they cause divisions between people who have more in common than they have difference. And that's one of the things that struck me yesterday when people were talking about that perennial question: what is youth work? How will we define it? The differences in different countries and different policies and different definitions. And on one level, part of me wants to go, that actually isn't the important thing. Those sorts of conversations sometimes keep us separate from each other. So I am a little bit of a believer that what we need to find out is what we have in common, and to work on those commonalities. And I think one of the things that we have in common is around our values. And that's one of the things that I want to talk about. So in some way, I suppose what I want to do is start with, so we have in this tool fair the idea of the hashtag know-how. And I think know-how is really important. But I think we also need to take a step back and into the idea of we also need to know why. Why are we doing things? Why are the things that we do important? Because each of us lives in a world where we have some ideas about how the world is, how the world should be, how what we do, so the know-how, contributes to making the world, changing the world in some sort of a way. So the idea of know why, I think, is really important. And that's, I think, in some way where our values live. And in that, I think we need to talk about the promise of youth work. And I think youth work does make a big promise to young people. Youth work promises, at some level, that young people will have a different experience in youth work than they have in the rest of their lives. They will experience relationships with youth workers that are different than the relationships with other adults in their lives. They will experience opportunities and activities and ways of being that are different. And so I think one of the big questions for us as youth workers is, how do we live that difference? How do we ensure that what we do doesn't replicate what young people experience outside youth work? And there's nothing automatic about that. It isn't automatic that just because we say to young people, get involved, you will experience something different, doesn't mean that it will unless we're conscious of it. And unless we are very conscious of it, that's where, for me, is where the know why bit happens. And we'll have big values in youth work, and we live those values in ways, I think, that are quite challenging, because the values are big. Even if you think about the youth strategy at the moment, their values are around three things: connecting, engaging, empowering. They're huge, huge promises that we make, and difficult promises to live, because if they were easy to live, we'd be doing them anyway. The world would be a different place if it was easy to connect, if it was easy to engage, if it was easy to empower. And so it's not. So part of how we can, I suppose, support ourselves around that is to talk to each other, is to support each other, and think about, how do I do that? So that's where that question came from. What's of value and how do I live that? My values should be visible in my practice. Somebody who doesn't know me or doesn't know my youth work should be able to, I think, come into a youth work setting and watch the engagement between young people and youth workers and be able to extrapolate the values. The values should be visible in our practice. So our values in youth work are embodied values, the notion of youth work as a relational practice. And in lots of ways, the relationships that we have in youth work are countercultural. They are counterintuitive in some way because they contain such a big promise. And that the idea, I think, for me, is that what we are trying to do, and what I would like to think we try and do, is model, if we model anything in youth work, is model how to be entirely human. Is how to pick up each day, meet each day anew, meet the challenges of each day anew, and continue. And that make our mistakes, apologize for our mistakes, learn from our mistakes, and move on. And I think that's both the promise of youth work and the challenge of youth work in some way. So in those ways, I suppose, I think often when I'm talking to in Ireland and we're interviewing people to come on the youth work programs, I ask the question, so tell us about your role, tell us about youth work. And people often describe it in terms of what they do or who they work with. I work with young women. I run a drug and alcohol awareness program. I run a sexual health program. I work with young people living on the streets. Whereas for me, I think if we could turn it around and talk about youth work, not so much just as a way of doing, but as a way of being with young people. A way of being in relationship with young people that holds true to that promise or the covenant in some way of youth work, that young people will experience something different and unique when they get involved in youth work. And then for me, I take that idea, I suppose, from a way of being with young people to also being a different way of being in the world. That the values of youth work are not just for the time that I work with young people. They're not just for, the 2 hours in the club or the weekend residential and then I go and live some other values. Because for me, the notion of an embodied practice means that the values that we live that we try and I suppose, yes, experience them in our day-to-day relationships in the world. Because youth work to me is essentially creative. We saw the tools market yesterday, we saw the various workshops, the endless and boundless creativity of the people here. But for me, there's another level of creativity, is that when we think about youth work and we think about the ideas and the values of empowerment, of participation, of equality, of respect, we know that for a lot of young people and a lot of us, we don't live in a world where those values are predominant. So what we're trying to do in youth work is actually create a new way of being in the world. We're trying to, in fact, create a world that maybe we don't know can exist, but we're ever hopeful. And that's one of the things I love about youth work, is that's essentially a hopeful practice. And that for me, our hopes reside in our values and trying to stay true to our values, whatever those might be. I don't think we have to share the same values. I think there's enough to go around, but I think there are some key ones in youth work that we do hold. So the other thing I was thinking about, and this is where values are so important, I think the answer to pretty much everything in youth work is it depends. So for instance, even here today, you could have so what time is the TFT talk? 9:30. Is it worth going to? Depends. So that's it. Anything that is meaningful, the answer is usually it depends. And I was talking to Enrico yesterday, and he was talking about working with youth workers and trainers and training new people around youth work, and their desire to have the question, just tell me what to do. Tell me what to do and I will do it. But of course, youth work and life isn't like that. The answer to most things is it depends. And which means then that we have to use our values not just as sort of lofty ideals, but in some way, some touchstones. So I carry a touchstone, literally. A touchstone in Ireland, it's called a hagstone. So they're stones that you find that have a hole in them. And I wear mine around my neck. And I hold it sometimes when I need to stay steady, when I need to have an answer to a question, when I need to think about something or dream about something, because it depends. The important things, and we have to take time, and we have to be in conversation, and we have to think about how do I act? What is the best, the most appropriate way to act in this context? Okay. And so this is what I'm teaching to students. I say there are the six most important words in youth work are, I don't know. Because we can't know. Life is complicated. Young people's lives are complicated. The world is complicated. And so being able to be steady with that I don't know is a really important quality, I think, in youth work. And then the next three is really where the excitement happens, because it's let's find out. Let's be in this together. Let's be in this curiosity, this inquiry, this trying to figure things out together. And therefore, in that case, then, you're on a journey with young people. You're in a different relationship. You're alongside them and beside them. You're working with them and alongside them. You're not doing youth work to them, or you're not doing youth work for them. And of course, that's challenging to do that, because it means a lot of the time letting go our adult ideas. Our ideas about that we often put on young people is that adults know, young people don't know. But it puts us all in the context of actually we're figuring this out together. And that then creates space for the young people to also be the ones who know and who don't know, and normalize that not knowing, because that's what it means to be human, is to not know, live fully and joyfully with not knowing, and being able to negotiate and navigate our life as we go. I get a lot of my inspiration from poetry. So Mary Oliver, who I quoted earlier, his poem is called "To Be Human is to Sing Your Own Song." And I really like that idea, that there is something that being human, becoming human, is something about finding our own voice. And we talk a lot about that in youth work, is finding our own voice. And so when we, in our relationships with young people, we create the spaces consciously for their voices to come through, not for our voices to dominate. Young people live in an adult-dominated world, in a world where their voices, where they're told their voices aren't important unless they come through in a very structured, controlled sort of way. So in youth work, what we're trying to do is create space for young people to both find their own voice and use their own voice. But of course, the thing is that to live in the world as social beings in social worlds, it's never just a singular voice, was the idea. It's about our voices. How do we make, when I find my voice, how do I work with you? How do I collaborate with you in order to create our voices? How do we do that? And that in some ways where some of the hard work of the work comes. So this is another one. I love Alice Walker. So we are the ones we've been waiting for. There is nobody who knows more than we know. We are our own experts. We are our own navigators. We get the huge privilege of working alongside and being alongside young people as they become that. And in lots of ways, in lots of contexts in the world, adults have been left behind by young people, much more noticeably these days, of course, around the climate strikes. Young people are saying, you're too slow, you're too behind, this is our lives, this is our time now. You need to pay attention to us. So we, in some way, have to do a little bit of catch up. So this is from a book around narrative in youth work and conversation. It's the big thing we say, that youth work is a particular way of a relational practice, a particular way of relating to young people, and it's based on ideas of conversation and dialogue. And I liked this idea, partly because it linked to some of the quotes about singing, but dialogue is a duet. It's not two solos. It's not two individual voices. It's two voices together. And the aspiration for that is a very noble aspiration, but it's really hard work. It's hard work to create a we in a world in lots of ways that elevates the I, the individualism. So we need to pay some attention to how we do that. Is the realization that actually this language that separates us is not that helpful. Because in reality, one person's ivory tower is somebody else's coalface. Because when you're in the academy, as I am, you still face a lot of the same grinds. And management that doesn't really understand you, impossible expectations, people who demand more of you than you feel that you're able to give, competing demands, a sense of how do I find a space to act in this? And so in lots of ways, what I've been trying to do in the last number of years is to bridge this gap, and is to work in the academy, and there are privileges that come with living and working in a university. I say live, it makes it sound like I spend a lot of time there, but I do, which is the other bit of university life, is that in the same way as youth workers are dedicated and passionate, I work with so many extraordinary, dedicated and passionate people in our university who are also dedicated to social change, who are dedicated to empowerment, who are dedicated to making a difference in the world. And part of how we do it is we work alongside youth organisations in Ireland and elsewhere, but in Ireland, to create learning programmes together, to create opportunities for youth workers to develop skills and abilities and understandings, and we do that in collaboration. And so that's, I suppose, the next bit that I wanted to talk about. So this is the one thing that looks like a slide from a class, doesn't it? It's, but I thought about it last night. I was thinking, so what would if I had this opportunity to talk to these people who have been good enough to get up and in here for 9:30, what would I want to say about collaboration? And one of the things that has come to me as I worked it out is to remember that the etymology of collaboration is literally that, is to co-labour. So there is an element of work to it, that it requires work and attention. But in my experience of doing this for quite a while, and here's some of the things that I think are important for me, the notion of a clarity of intention. What are we trying to do here? Hard and sometimes long conversations, a quality of attention to each other, to the process, to the boundaries that you live within, an appreciation of the contexts. What's possible? What's not possible? What are the expectations? Where's the capacity for flexibility? And then a willingness, and these are the qualities of the collaborators, a willingness not to know, to just not know, okay? To challenge each other, but also to challenge our institutions and our organizations, to challenge the policymakers, is to all the time to not accept the initial no's or the question marks, to be challenged, to be stretched in some way, to not live with, well, this is how we do things and this is what I know, but to be stretched, to be bold, to take risks, to just, what is it from Star Trek? To boldly go where no human being has gone before, in whatever your context is. And for me, there's a couple of things to remember. This notion of bringing your grown-up to the party is that what we have to do, I think, in some ways, take responsibility for ourselves in those relationships and to not fall back into the sort of easy sort of, I suppose, stereotypes. Oh, they're like this, we're the ones who know, they don't really understand. But in some way to bring that, to learn to play well with others, is to have some fun in it, but also in some way to let go of some of the sharp edges that we all have sometimes in our relationships. To find allies, to be an ally, to be authentic. It came up yesterday, to be curious, to imagine. Act where you can. It relates to being bold. Take the step. Push the boundary. Celebrate the small wins, because you'll have more of those than you'll have of the big ones. And bring an awareness of there being multiple realities. That there is no, I suppose, and this comes from me from my interest in narrative, is the realization is that there is no singular truth. That there are multiple realities and multiple truths. And that we need to find ways to do that. So, Maya Angelou, this is it. It's all in progress. So we do the best we can until we know better. And then we know better, we do better. That is the imperative. Is that the imperative is around moving forward all of the time. Because hope is the better story. And so this is how I want to finish. I've had the privilege of working on a KA2, which some of you saw last night in the tool fair, and working with extraordinary people around various dimensions of youth work. But this very short clip comes from a woman called Ashrav Patel from India. She is part of an organization called Fifth Space, the idea that they're creating a fifth space for young people. And I chose it particularly not just because of what she says, but also as an indication that youth work and those values that we have are part of a global phenomenon. We are not alone, that this is something, and I think that's just an extraordinarily hopeful moment for me.
the value of youth work is we are supporting young people to not only have personal transformation but also make change in the world. And if they are able to shape the world in a positive way, then it's just creating a better space for other young people. So it's really like for the well-being of the universe.
And so that's my question. We finish off. How is your work going to contribute to the well-being of the universe? Thank you very much.